Bremen, 1945. The city lies shattered under a grey sky, its streets transformed into corridors of rubble and ash. Allied bombs have carved the landscape into something unrecognizable, where once proud buildings now stand as skeletal reminders of what was lost. In this wasteland of broken stone and twisted metal, survival has become the only currency that matters. Clara moves through the debris with careful, deliberate steps. Her clothes hang loosely on her frame, testament to months of deprivation. Hunger has become her constant companion, a gnawing presence that dictates every decision, every movement. She searches the ruins of what was once a theater, her fingers sifting through dust and fragments, hoping to find forgotten grain stores beneath the collapsed stage. The war has taught her to look for sustenance in impossible places. Where others see only destruction, she sees potential hiding spots for forgotten food. Her hands move mechanically, pushing aside chunks of plaster and splintered wood. The physical act of searching keeps despair at bay, gives purpose to hours that might otherwise stretch into madness. The rumble of engines disrupts the eerie quiet. American jeeps roll into the central square, their presence both promise and threat. Clara freezes, instinct telling her to hide, but exhaustion keeps her visible among the ruins. She watches as soldiers dismount, their uniforms crisp and foreign against the backdrop of devastation. Jack Saunders notices her immediately. Something in her stillness catches his attention amid the chaos. He sees past the dirt and ragged clothing to recognize what she truly is. Another casualty of circumstances beyond her control. He approaches slowly, reading her wariness in every tense muscle. From his pocket, Jack produces a small bar of chocolate, part of his ration. He extends it toward Clara without words, understanding that language barriers matter less than gestures in moments like these. The chocolate represents more than food. It represents choice, humanity, and the acknowledgement that she still exists as a person worthy of kindness. Clara stares at the offering, suspicion warring with desperate need. She has learned that nothing comes without price, that generosity often masks ulterior motives, yet the simplicity of the gesture disarms her. This soldier asks nothing in return, expects no gratitude, simply waits for her to decide. Her fingers close around the chocolate bar, their eyes meet, and in that silent exchange, something fundamental shifts. Jack sees her not as enemy or victim, but as someone who has endured what no person should endure. Clara recognizes in him an unexpected quality, genuine concern without condescension. The moment stretches between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Around them, other soldiers begin organizing relief efforts, cataloging damage, establishing temporary command posts. But in this small interaction, the machinery of occupation pauses. Two individuals, stripped of nationality and military designation, simply acknowledge each other's humanity. Clara breaks the chocolate into small pieces, consuming it slowly to make it last. Jack remains nearby, not hovering but present, respecting her space while ensuring she knows she is no longer alone in the ruins. The first fragile thread of connection has been established, setting in motion events that neither could have anticipated in this devastated square. The refugee camp sprawls across what was once a public park, now transformed into a makeshift settlement of canvas tents and wooden structures. Jack guides Clara through the entrance, past weary guards who barely register another displaced civilian. The camp pulses with quiet desperation, hundreds of souls attempting to rebuild some semblance of existence from the fragments of their shattered lives. Clara resists at first, her body tensing as they approach the registration tent. Accepting help feels like surrender, an admission that she cannot survive alone. But hunger overrides pride, and she allows herself to be led forward. The officials process her quickly, assigning her a tent number and a ration card that feels both life-saving and humiliating in her trembling hands. Food arrives on a metal tray, watery soup, hard bread, and powdered milk mixed into something resembling sustenance. Clara eats slowly, her stomach unused to anything beyond scraps and desperation. Around her, other refugees mirror her actions, each person isolated within their own sphere of trauma and loss. Jack returns the following day, carrying additional supplies. He finds Clara sitting outside her tent, staring at nothing in particular. the 1,000-yard stare of someone who has witnessed too much. He sets down canned goods and blankets without ceremony, then sits nearby on an upturned crate. They attempt conversation, though it comes haltingly. Jack's German is rudimentary, Clara's English nearly non-existent. Yet they persist, cobbling together understanding through gestures, simple words, and shared silence. He tells her about his home in Pennsylvania, about mountains that remain standing and streets untouched by bombs. She listens without responding, unable to imagine a world that hasn't been consumed by fire and destruction. Days pass with Jack visiting regularly. Clara begins to regain physical strength, her face losing some of its gaunt desperation, but the emotional wounds run deeper than malnutrition. She wakes screaming from nightmares, reliving moments she cannot articulate even to herself. Other refugees give her space, recognizing the particular brand of suffering that requires solitude to process. Jack notices the dark circles under her eyes, the way she startles at sudden sounds. He brings her small comforts, a book in German, salvaged from a partially intact library, a wool scarf as temperatures drop with approaching winter. These offerings come without expectation, simple acknowledgments that she deserves more than bare survival. Slowly, incrementally, Clara begins to thaw. She asks Jack about his family, learning he has a sister who writes him long letters filled with mundane details about life continuing elsewhere. The normalcy of these stories feels alien, yet comforting, proof that somewhere beyond the devastation, ordinary existence persists. One evening, as autumn rain drums against canvas, Clara speaks more than she has since their first meeting. She tells Jack about her parents, about the music that once filled their home before bombs silenced it forever. Her voice breaks multiple times, but she pushes through, exercising memories that have festered in silence too long. Jack listens without interruption, understanding that bearing witness is sometimes the greatest service one person can offer another. When she finishes, exhausted and hollow, he simply nods, acknowledging the weight of what she has shared. No platitudes, no false assurances that everything will be fine, just presence and the quiet promise that she will not face tomorrow alone. Jack sits in the officer's briefing room, surrounded by maps marking zones of control and reconstruction timelines. His commanding officer outlines policies for managing the civilian population, speaking in clinical terms about rationing protocols and curfew enforcement. The words wash over Jack, but his mind remains fixed on the faces he sees daily in the refugee camp. Statistics transform into individuals when you know their names, their stories, their suffering. After the briefing, Jack approaches his superior with carefully chosen words. He questions whether current aid allocations adequately address the scale of civilian need. The response comes swift and bureaucratic. Resources are finite. Priorities must favor military objectives. Sentiment cannot dictate policy. Jack retreats, frustration simmering beneath his disciplined exterior. Walking back through Bremen's devastated streets, he confronts the dissonance between his role and his conscience. He wears the uniform of an occupying force, represents a nation that dropped the bombs that created this destruction, yet he also witnesses the aftermath, sees children rummaging through garbage, elderly people dying from exposure and malnutrition. The moral arithmetic of war refuses to balance cleanly. At the camp, Clara struggles with her own demons. Sleep brings no rest, only vivid recreations of moments she cannot escape. She sees her mother's face in the instant before the building collapsed, hears her father's voice calling out in darkness. These memories arrive unbidden, hijacking present moments and dragging her back into trauma's grip. She withdraws further into herself, speaking less even as her body grows stronger. Other refugees attempt friendship, but Clara cannot bridge the distance between herself and others. Survival has carved isolation into her bones, taught her that attachment leads only to loss. Better to remain alone than to risk caring again. Jack recognizes the warning signs, has seen enough combat trauma to identify someone drowning in their own mind. He adjusts his approach, sitting with Clara without demanding conversation. Sometimes they spend entire visits in silence, his presence a quiet anchor against the tide of her internal chaos. One afternoon, he brings photographs from home. Images of his family standing in front of an intact house, smiling without fear. His sister holding a new baby, life continuing its relentless forward march. Clara studies these pictures with something approaching wonder. Trying to remember what normalcy looked like before everything shattered, she begins talking, hesitantly at first, about life before the war. Her words paint pictures of Sunday concerts, of her father conducting local musicians in Mozart and Beethoven, of her mother's garden where roses bloomed each spring, of dreams she once harbored about studying literature, traveling to Paris, living a life filled with beauty rather than survival. Jack listens, recognizing the courage required to speak these memories aloud. Each word is an act of defiance against the destruction that tried to erase who she was before trauma redefined her. He responds carefully, asking gentle questions that encourage her to continue rather than retreat. As evening shadows lengthen across the camp, Clara admits what frightens her most, the possibility that she will never feel whole again, that trauma has permanently broken something essential within her. Jack offers no false comfort, no promises that healing comes easily or completely. Instead, he tells her that survival itself is an achievement worth acknowledging, that choosing to continue, day after difficult day, requires more strength than most people ever discover they possess. Weeks blend into months as winter settles over Bremen. The camp transforms under snow, white covering ruins and making devastation appear almost peaceful in early morning light. Clara has grown accustomed to Jack's daily visits, no longer startling when he appears at her tent. What began as wary acceptance has evolved into something resembling anticipation. Jack arrives one morning carrying a battered suitcase retrieved from storage. Inside, he reveals fragments of his pre-war life, letters from his sister, a photograph of his childhood home nestled in Pennsylvania mountains, a harmonica he played before military service claimed him. He shares these pieces carefully, inviting Clara into his history as she has allowed him into hers. Clara examines each item with reverence, understanding the trust implicit in their sharing. She asks about his sister's letters, and Jack translates passages describing harvest festivals and school plays, ordinary moments that feel extraordinary against the backdrop of their current reality. These glimpses into untouched American life provide Clara with evidence that normalcy still exists somewhere beyond the destruction. In return, Clara begins teaching Jack German phrases beyond basic commands. They sit together practicing pronunciation C, laughing when he mangles particularly difficult words. Laughter feels foreign at first, almost inappropriate given surrounding circumstances, but it persists. Small moments of levity create cracks in trauma's fortress, allowing light to penetrate spaces long held in darkness. Jack brings Clara small gifts scavenged from the city, a mostly intact music box that plays Schubert, a volume of Goethe's poetry with water-stained pages, a blue scarf that reminds her of ones her mother wore. These offerings demonstrate attention, proof that he listens when she speaks about her past, remembers details she mentions in passing. Clara responds by opening further. She describes her childhood home in detail, recreating rooms from memory as if architectural precision might resurrect what bombs destroyed. She talks about her father's dedication to music, how he believed beauty could transcend politics and violence. How wrong he was, she adds quietly, but how necessary that belief had been for him to continue living. They explore the camp together, Clara introducing Jack to other refugees she has befriended, an elderly woman who teaches children makeshift lessons using scraps of paper and charcoal, a former shopkeeper who organizes resource sharing among families, a young boy who draws elaborate pictures of imaginary cities where nothing is broken. Jack witnesses Clara's transformation through these interactions. The withdrawn woman he first encountered has begun rebuilding connections, tentatively reconstructing social bonds trauma severed. She smiles more frequently, though sadness still shadows her expressions. She engages with the present rather than remaining trapped entirely in the past. One evening, as they walk the camp's perimeter, Clara admits something that costs her considerable courage. She no longer wishes merely to survive, but to actually live again. The distinction matters enormously. Survival is mechanical, breathing and eating without purpose beyond continuation. Living requires hope, planning, believing that future moments might contain something beyond endurance. Jack recognizes the significance of this admission. He takes her hand, the first deliberate physical contact between them, and tells her that wanting more than survival is not naive or foolish. It is human, and perhaps the only truly defiant response to everything that tried to destroy humanity within her. The camp's lights flicker on as darkness falls, small flames of persistence against the night. Spring arrives reluctantly in Bremen, bringing with it new challenges and uncomfortable realities. Jack receives orders regarding the camp's future. Consolidation efforts will soon transfer refugees to larger facilities, bureaucratic machinery grinding forward with indifferent efficiency. The news weighs heavily as he considers what this means for Clara, for the fragile stability she has only recently achieved. He sits in his quarters that evening, wrestling with a decision that blurs the boundaries between duty and personal involvement. His commanding officers have made clear that fraternization beyond professional necessity carries consequences. Yet Jack cannot view Clara through the lens of regulation and protocol anymore. She has become something more complex than a displaced civilian requiring management. The following day, Jack finds Clara tending a small garden plot she has cultivated near her tent. She has coaxed green shoots from salvaged seeds, creating life from soil that absorbed so much death. He watches her work before speaking, noting how purpose has restored color to her cheeks, strength to her movements. He presents his proposal carefully, explaining that he can arrange her transfer to American facilities where conditions are significantly better, where she might access educational opportunities, job training, pathways toward actual reconstruction rather than mere subsistence. The bureaucracy is complex, he admits, but navigable for someone with his position and connections. Clara's hands still in the dirt. She does not look at him immediately, processing implications that extend beyond logistics. Accepting means severing ties with other German refugees, marking herself as someone who chose American protection over solidarity with her countrymen. It means embracing uncertainty, trading familiar misery for unknown circumstances. She voices her fears without filter. What if other Germans view her as a collaborator, someone who abandoned her people for personal advantage? What if she loses the last fragments of her identity, becoming neither German nor American, but something suspended between worlds? What if Jack's intentions, however genuine they appear, mask expectations she cannot fulfill? Jack listens without interrupting, allowing her concerns to fill the space between them. When she finishes, he responds with honesty that matches her vulnerability. He acknowledges that his proposal is complicated, that his motivations are not purely altruistic. He cares about her outcome specifically, not just as one displaced person among thousands. This complicates everything, while simultaneously being the only truth that matters. He cannot promise that transition will be painless, or that she will not face judgment from various quarters. He cannot guarantee that she will not sometimes feel lost between cultures, languages, identities. But he can promise that she will have opportunities currently unavailable, chances to rebuild a life containing more than survival's bare minimum. Clara stands, brushing soil from her hands. She walks to the edge of the garden plot, looking toward Bremen's broken skyline. Silence stretches between them, heavy with the weight of choices that will redirect the trajectory of her entire existence. Finally, she turns back to Jack. Her expression carries resignation, mixed with determination, the look of someone who recognizes that remaining static is itself a choice, and not necessarily the safest one. She tells him she needs time to consider, to make peace with what acceptance would mean. Jack nods, respecting her need for agency in a situation where so much has been dictated by forces beyond her control. He will wait for her answer, however long consideration requires. 3 days pass before Clara seeks out Jack. He finds her waiting outside the administrative building, her posture betraying nervous energy barely contained. She has made her decision, though the weight of it shows in the tension around her eyes, the way her fingers worry at the edges of her worn coat. They walk to a quiet corner of the camp, away from curious ears and the constant hum of communal life. Clara speaks slowly, choosing each word with care. She has decided to accept his offer, not because she believes it will be easy, but because remaining paralyzed by fear of judgment serves no purpose. She has already lost everything that defined her previous existence. Clinging to geographical proximity of those losses will not resurrect what is gone. Jack releases breath he did not realize he was holding. Relief floods through him, followed immediately by the sobering recognition of responsibilities he has now assumed. Arranging Clara's transfer involves navigating layers of military bureaucracy. Filing paperwork that requires justifications he must frame carefully to avoid suspicion about the nature of their relationship. He begins the process immediately, spending evening hours completing forms and securing necessary approvals. His commanding officer reviews the paperwork with raised eyebrows, but ultimately signs off, perhaps recognizing that one refugee's improved circumstances serves broader humanitarian optics. Jack does not examine the approval too closely, grateful simply that machinery has been set in motion. Clara spends these weeks preparing mentally for departure. She says goodbye to people she has come to know, sharing addresses that may or may not remain valid, making promises to write that circumstances may render impossible. The elderly teacher gives her a small book of German folk tales. The former shopkeeper offers a carefully wrapped package of dried herbs. The young artist presents a drawing of Clara sitting in her garden, an image of peace captured in charcoal. These farewells carry weight beyond simple goodbyes. Clara is severing connections to the last community that shares her language, her history, her specific experience of loss. Moving forward means embracing isolation of a different kind, becoming perpetually foreign in whatever space she occupies. Jack recognizes her melancholy and addresses it directly one evening. He asks what frightens her most about leaving. Clara responds with characteristic honesty. She fears forgetting who she was before trauma and displacement rewrote her identity. She fears that adapting to American life will require abandoning the parts of herself that remain distinctly German, that assimilation will complete the erasure war began. Jack considers his response carefully. He tells her that identity is not static, that holding on to a fixed version of self serves no one. She will change regardless of where she lives, because surviving what she has survived has already transformed her irrevocably. The question is not whether she will remain exactly as she was, but whether she will allow herself to become something new that incorporates both past and future. His words do not eliminate her fear, but they reframe it as something manageable rather than insurmountable. Change becomes inevitability rather than betrayal. Clara nods slowly, accepting this perspective even as anxiety persists. The transfer date is set for the following week. Jack begins making final arrangements while Clara prepares to leave the only certainty she has known since war's end. The week passes with surreal speed, days collapsing into each other as Clara's departure becomes imminent. Jack works tirelessly on final arrangements, securing transportation and confirming her placement at the American facility. But late one evening, reviewing immigration documentation, he confronts a bureaucratic reality that threatens everything. Unmarried German civilians face significantly more restrictive pathways to relocation, particularly to the United States. He sits with this information, understanding its implications. There exists a solution, though it carries enormous consequences for both of them. Marriage would provide Clara legal status, transform her from displaced enemy civilian to military spouse with protected rights and clear pathways forward. But proposing such an arrangement feels presumptuous, transactional in ways that cheapen what has developed between them. Yet practical necessity overrides romantic idealism. The following morning, Jack presents the situation to Clara with characteristic directness. He explains the legal obstacles, then offers marriage not as romantic gesture, but as strategic solution to bureaucratic barriers. He emphasizes that she should feel no pressure, that he will continue seeking alternatives if this option makes her uncomfortable. Clara listens without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Jack finishes, silence stretches between them while she processes the proposal's full meaning. Finally, she asks a single question. Does he want this only to solve her paperwork problems, or does he envision something genuine between them? Jack answers truthfully. What began as simple compassion has evolved into something deeper, though he hesitates to define it precisely given the circumstances of their meeting. War and desperation make poor foundations for assessing authentic connection. But he cares about her specifically, not as abstract humanitarian project, but as Clara herself. Whether that constitutes love or something else, he cannot say with certainty. His honesty disarms her. She admits that she too has felt their relationship shift into territory beyond friendship, though guilt accompanies this recognition. How can she trust feelings developed under such extreme circumstances? How can she separate genuine affection from gratitude and dependency born of survival? Jack acknowledges these questions have no easy answers. Perhaps they never will know definitively what they might have felt toward each other under different circumstances. But they exist in this reality, not some hypothetical alternative, and must make decisions based on actual rather than ideal conditions. Clara agrees to the marriage, accepting both its practical necessity and its uncertain emotional foundation. They will move forward together, acknowledging complexity rather than pretending clarity they do not possess. The ceremony occurs 2 days later in the military chapel, officiated by a chaplain who asks no probing questions. No guests attend beyond 2 soldiers serving as required witnesses. Clara wears a borrowed dress, simple and clean. Jack wears his dress uniform. They exchange vows in English, words Clara has practiced phonetically, their meaning weighty despite her imperfect pronunciation. Afterward, they stand outside the chapel as spring rain begins to fall. Clara looks toward Bremen's distant skyline one final time, saying silent goodbye to everything she has lost and everything she was. The city that shaped her childhood no longer exists except in memory. She turns away from the ruins, facing instead toward Jack and the uncertain future he represents. Tomorrow they depart for the American facility, beginning Clara's journey toward a life she cannot yet imagine.